I want to jump right to my teaching. I will say that after I'm done with all my teaching, if anybody wants an insight of mine about the election, I'm happy to offer it. Not an argument, not a polemic, not a persuasion, just a few insights. I will say I've read incredibly deep insights this week, and whatever is going to happen, and again, depending on your politics, you may like it, you may not. I am really pleased to see the level of analysis without hatred, without acrimony, without fear mongering, trying to understand what's happening in the hearts and minds of all those who voted. So if anybody's interested, when we're all done, I can offer a few of my insights. It will not be a debate. You want to debate, go find someone else to debate because I'm not going to debate anybody. I also want to say, Mirab and I have had to take a complete break from our computers. It just after the high holidays, we kept trying to keep up, and we just had to stop. So if you've written an email, you're waiting for a response, you will get it. But we have just had to disconnect and Shavat Vayinafash, take a breath and re-insole and recharge our batteries and prepare for the wonderful year ahead of us. So as you know, I'm doing a deep analysis of the Bible, starting with the first Torah portion. Maybe I'll only do the first Torah portion, maybe more. In doing the first Torah portion, it might take a few months, it might take even longer, because I want to do something that I've actually never done before, and that is not have to hurry through a Torah portion with a given allotted time, not even have to particularly create a cogent takeaway message, but rather share with you what it's like to go into the depths of Torah. As I've said many times in introducing, it's a really wonderful, majestic, deep text, but most people have no idea because they've never been able to study the text in a deep, powerful, penetrating way. So again, the methodology is I'm reading it as literature, not as scripture, meaning each section of the text stands on its own. There is an author, there is a time and place that's hard for us to reconstruct, but we should know that there is an author, there is an audience, there is a cultural context, and there is literary beauty. So I am focused in reading the text and drawing meaning out from the text as the text stands. Not a time for midrash. If we want to do midrash on Genesis, we can do that at another time. But for last couple of times and this time, I really want us to sink into the deep study of the text. We finished the first section, Genesis 1:1 to Genesis 2:4, if I'm not mistaken. 2:3. That's a separate literary unit. It's really a standalone creation poem. I believe written at the end of the First Commonwealth, around the time of Jeremiah. I think the author actually might be Jeremiah from internal evidence. It's a wonderful, austere poem with many, many different dimensions, as we discussed. Now we're in a second creation story, but that's a mistake because remember, this creation story thought it was the only creation story. So from a scriptural perspective, from the canon, meaning the text that we have, it's second. But it was a later editor who put Jeremiah's poem first and this poem second, or this myth second. It might have actually been Jeremiah himself. All right, so let's dig in. So hopefully you have a Bible handy, and we are in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4. Now it says, Ele toldot hashamayim va'aretz. Now the Hebrew word toldot means the history of or generations of. You can hear in this word the word yeled or yelda, boy or girl. Laledet means to bear a child in Hebrew. Leholid means to sire or to cause a woman to become pregnant. So you have a sense not just of generations, but a really deep sense of the generative sense of the universe, that it is a birthing process. Then it says Behi Baram. It's very strange. If you look at your translation, it will say when they were created. We don't know why it doesn't give God agency, where it says that God had created. Again, there's this sense, as we saw with Shabbat last time, it moves to a passive voice as if it has some kind of generative power on its own. Beyom asot Adonai Elohim eretz v'shamayim. Notice this contradicts with the previous poem. It says, on the day that Adonai Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Of course, we know from the other one, it took 6 days to create, 1 day to rest. On the other hand, the word yom can also just mean a period of time. Now, what this poem sets out is that the entire world had been created in potential, which means everything was ready to go, but there had not yet been rain. So it says, um, there is no rain, but especially it says, if you look at the end of verse 5, it says, Ve'adam ayin la'avod et adama, and there was no Adam to work the land. So now we understand from this that it's not as if the world were created and the Adam was placed as a kind of an addendum, an extra thing, but the entire world was created so that the Adam would work the land. Now, this word la'avod, and it's a wonderful play on words because the Hebrew word la'avod means work and worship. In fact, if you look at the Bible, the word la'avod is mostly used as worship. And now, clearly, worship is a kind of work. If we define work as some kind of intentional human activity that is meant to transform something. So how is avodah work? Well, it's intentional, it's conscious, and it's human, the human spirit engaged with something to cause a transformation. Now, in this sense, clearly in ancient biblical thought, to worship God is to propitiate, to gain God's favor. Of course, from a more modern spiritual psychological perspective, avodah is inner transformation. From a Kabbalistic perspective, we are transforming ourselves. And from an inner Kabbalistic perspective, we're not actually propitiating the divine, which would be a more ancient way of saying it, meaning gain divine favor, but rather repairing for the divine. So the word still works as an act of work and an act of what I'll call now devotion. I don't like the word worship. Worship simply means to ascribe worthiness. I prefer the term to translate the word la'avod as devotional work. You see that in the Hindu tradition, bhakti yoga is the devotional life. So when you think of la'avod, think of work, and then also think of the devotional life. So here, la'avod et adama, here it clearly means to work the land, but they're using a term that later comes to mean the devotional life. We're moving toward the creation of the human being. In verse 6, ve'ed ya'aleh min ha'aretz, a vapor was coming out from the land, and it watered al pnei ha'adamah. So remember, before the water was hovering everywhere, was filling the expanse. Here, there's a mist coming up from the land, and now we get to the main section here. Genesis 2, verse 7. Vayitzer Adonai Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adamah, vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim, vayihi ha'adam lenefesh chaya. Now here there's a nice etymological play on the word Adam and Adamah that you don't have in the first poem. So Adam means a human being or the human being. Remember, Adam is not the human being's name. Adam is the species. Ha-Adam, the human being. The best translation I've heard for Adam is Earthman. I don't know where I heard it. I heard it back in the 80s because Adamah is earth. Adam is built from the lamb. So we have this wonderful image that litzor means to create. It means to shape. For example, the Hebrew word for a potter is a yotzer. So when you hear the word yotzer, even yotzer shemayim va'aretz, God is creator of heavens and the earth, is a sense of some kind of a divine shaping. Now you have to see it in a clearly metaphoric sense. The image is the potter, but of course we don't image the divine with hands. We don't image the device with manipulating the earth. But there's a clear sense that the human being is shaped by the divine. If we fast forward to the end of our Torah portion, where it says Kol Yetzer Machshavot Hadam, all of the shaping of the thoughts of the human being goes back to this. So since we read this poem in its entirety, I believe that the word here, Vayitzer, shape the human being, jumps forward to the end of our Torah portion with the Yetzer Hara, meaning in the divine shaping from the lamb, there's also something of a yetzer, a shape that is destructive, that is even being formed in some kind of embryonic way that only begins to flourish in the next big scene, which is the Gan Eden, which we translate as the Garden of Eden. I think it's a misdirection because Garden of Eden already makes us think of some kind of idyllic place of luxury. It's not what happens there. I recently read a commentary that calls it the Garden of Confrontation, which I like much better. It's not what the words mean, but that's what happens there. The Garden of Misdirection and Confrontation. We'll get there. He Adonai Elohim shapes the Adam, afar min ha'adamah. So the top level of the earth, not really, I would say dirt, although that doesn't sound as nice as dust. So there's the top layer of the Adamah. Images the divine takes this and shapes it like the golem in some way. And like the image of the golem later, where the golem is animated when they put the name of God into the heart of the golem. You also see this in the movie Iron Man, and it's clearly I knew Jon Favreau at the time. He clearly took it straight from this story. We have this inert shaped Adamah, shaped earth that becomes the Adam, the earth man. And it says he blew into his nose or his nostrils a nishmat chaim. And here's where we get the word neshama. So neshama is from the Hebrew word linshom, which means to breathe. I love the image of the divine breathing in and breathing out the soul into the human being. And then by extension, I heard someone say once, when we breathe in, God is breathing out. When we're breathing out, God is breathing in. I love the image. It's not what it says here, but I think it's a wonderful, inspiring interpretation that even in our act of breathing is the divine and the human being engaged in this mutual ensouling of each other. So the Hebrew word neshama, one of our words for soul, means divine breath. By the way, aspirate, the idea of aspiration in breathing is here too, hence spirituality. Spirituality is from the Latin word to breathe, if I'm not mistaken. And then it says, Vayehi ha'adam lenefesh chaya. And the Adam, the earthman, became a living being. Nefesh here has a sense of having blood in it and being animated. But again, the word nefesh takes on many, many meanings in the Bible. So the words, when people ask me, what does the word neshama mean? What does the word nefesh mean? The word is stable, but the meanings develop through the Bible. How do you know what a word means? Typically from context. So for example, when we say, Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam, the light of God is the human spirit, soul, breath, divine breath. We have to pick one word when we translate. So I prefer Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam, the light of God is the human spirit or the human soul. That takes us right back to this verse. Ner Adonai, the light of God, has been, as it were, breathed into the human being. So now the terms in that verse from Proverbs, breath and light of God have become mixed. Next scene. Vayita Adonai Elohim Gan Be'edem. So here's an interesting thing. A garden Be'edem. Eden here seems to be a place, a location that God chose in which to plant the garden. So we call it Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden or Eden. Here's called the Gan Be'edem. And you'll see that later on in this chapter, the author is very interested in locating where this Eden is. There's a place called Eden, and there is a Gan in Eden. Now, where? Mikedem. Now, Kedem in Hebrew means east. It's interesting. The directions Hebrew are Yama, Mediterranean, west, Safona, north. The Hebrew word Safun means hidden, the hidden region. Negba, which means dry, in the south. And Kedema means back east, from the word Kodem, meaning the place we came from. So directions in Hebrew are sea, hidden, dry, and origin. That's what the four directions mean actually in the Hebrew language. Kedem means earlier. It means the foregoing. Adam Kadmon, the primordial human being, a sense of origin. So even the Hebrew mind in the land of Israel understood the origins as being in the east, probably because the sun came up in the east, and they saw the region where the sun came up as the origins of humankind. So already here, we're seeing the perspective of the text being written in Eretz Yisrael, because they're already talking about Kedim. Uh, we say in California back east, eastward here. And it says Vayasem Shaman, the divine placed the human being Asher Yatzar, which God had as it were shaped. Now we move into the next scene, which is the tree. So we're all heading toward the confrontation in Gan Eden, the Garden of Confrontation. So it says, Vayitzmach Adonai Elohim min ha'adamah, and God caused to sprout from the Adamah. So here you'll see the constant repetition of Adam, Adamah, Adam, Adamah in the portion. Kol eitz nechmad lemar'eh, every tree nechmad lemar'eh. Now the Hebrew word nechmad, very common in Hebrew, means sweetie or honey when people use it. Nechmad means really fun. So you can say a person is nechmad. You can say an event was nechmad. The word hamad in Hebrew is in the Ten Commandments when it says al tachmod, don't covet. So the word hamad has a sense of coveting in the active. Nechmad is that which one covets, the coveted item. So when you see don't covet, it'd be better to translate it as al tachmod, don't see another person's property, another person's spouse, etc., as something that you desire, that you would find fun and interesting. So the word tachmod, covet makes it sound too austere. The tree is nechmad. Now that comes into play when the woman in the Garden of Eden looks at the trees and sees them as nechmad, exactly as they are created. But you'll see that in that story, another quality is added. So this is setting up the confrontation in Eden between the woman. By the way, why am I not calling her Eve? She doesn't get the name Eve until the end of chapter 3. So I'm trying to stay loyal to the text. Her name is not yet Eve. She's called the woman, and at the very end of chapter 3, her name is Chava, or Eve. In any case, it's nechmad mar'eh, nice to see, desirable to see, v'tov l'ma'achal, and good to eat, and Eitz HaChaim b'toch hagam, and the tree of life in the midst of the garden, ve'etz hadat tov v'ra. So now we see ourselves moving forward to the confrontation. So there's a tree of life in the middle of the garden. Now we don't know from the Hebrew if the next tree is a different tree, meaning there are two trees, or whether they're the same. The Hebrew word and sometimes can mean two qualities of the same object. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but can also be da'at, can here mean knowing. The tree of the knowing of good and evil. Again, translators have to choose one word. The Hebrew can bear both. So, Eitz HaChaim b'toch hagam, the tree of life in the middle of the garden, in the midst of the garden. Ve'etz hadat tov v'ra, the tree of knowing tov v'ra. Now, what does tov v'ra mean? It's a very rare word couple in the Bible. You find it one other time at the end of book of Samuel, where David is talking to one of his patrons and says, why don't you come back to Jerusalem and live there? And in the context, there's all these wonderful female singers. And the guy says, look, I don't even know Tov V'ra anymore. And you get the sense that Tov V'ra is something of a metaphor for sexuality. Now, it's not conclusive, but if you look where this exact term is used, Tov V'ra in the Bible is very rare. And in one sense, a guy says, why would I want to go to Jerusalem? I don't even know Tov V'ra anymore. So there is a little undercurrent that Tov V'ra has within it a sense of sexuality, probably meaning the permitted and the forbidden. So when a person is completely uninterested in sexuality, They don't know Torah. They don't know forbidden, not forbidden. They're not interested in any of it. So I'll have the exact citation for you next time. Um, uh, and now we're locating the Garden of Eden. I'm going to skip this part. You can read it yourselves from verse 10. But in general, the author in the land of Israel knows something about the mythological geography of East, meaning the headwaters of the Tigris, Euphrates, and the different rivers around it. So the author is giving us a geographical sense of Mesopotamia, the rivers around it, which are creating the flourishing garden. So if you're interested in biblical geography, you can read that part. I want to move to where the action is. We're going to jump to verse 15. And again, this is the chapter 2 is setting up chapter 3. That's one reason I want to move through it quickly. It's all here to set up chapter 3. Vayikach Adonai Elohim et Adam vayanichehu v'gan Eden le'ovda u'leshomra. Now, we don't know where the Adam was created. We know that God created a Gan in Eden. The Adam was somewhere else, and God placed the Adam in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden. Oh, by the word Eden itself. I've mentioned this before. When God tells Sarah she's about to give birth, she laughs and says, could someone my age experience Edna? Could someone my age experience Edna? I'm withered. I don't know the way of women anymore. Could I experience Edna? So even in the story of Sarah, Edna means sexual pleasure. So the term Gan Eden already, again, predicting chapter 3, has a sense of sexuality. Again, this is not a conclusive proof of that, what it means, but again, Edna is Eden, Edna is a rare word in the Bible, and when used with the story of Sarah, it means her no longer having the capacity or the pleasure in sex. And of course, lo and behold, she bears a child in her in ancient age, and we're going to assume from normal sexual practice. Um, uh, and place the human being there, le'ovda u'leshomra, to work it and to guard it. Now, here is evidence of what I'm going to call Jeremiah's Deuteronomic language, because la'avod means to worship. Lishmor, as you know, has a sense of keeping the Sabbath. Lishmor mitzvot. So la'avod in later Hebrew means to worship God, meaning the Hebrew of the author. La'avod means to worship God. Lishmor means to keep commandments. So they're taking these two archetypal activities of the religious human being, worship and observe commandments, and putting it in the garden to work the garden, vilis shomra, and to guard it. We don't know from whom. So that's why the word is a little bit out of context. But the author is trying to set up the nature of the religious human being to for devotional life and to observe commandments as the primary activity in the Gan Eden. So we see the author who's living at a time when la'avod v'lishmor meant devotional life and observe commandment, retrojecting back into the scene in Gan Eden. Then it says, now here we have the first commandment of the Bible. The first commandment of the Bible. Vayitzav, remember, not ever, not in history, but just in the Bible. Vayitzav Adonai Elohim al ha'adam. And God, Adonai Elohim, places a commandment upon the human being, lemor, mikol etz hagan achol tocheo. Now, it's Vayitzav means is to command. He commands him, saying, from every tree of the garden you shall indeed eat. Now, from context, it seems like a permission, but we have to infer that because the wording is God commanded the human being to eat. It probably means you may eat because the tzav, the commandment, comes in the next part of the sentence where it says, however, and mi'etz hadat tovara lo tochal mimenu. Do not eat from that. So here's the commandment, the negative commandment. Ki, because bayom acholcha memenu mot tamut. on the day or the moment when you eat from it, you shall surely die. Mot tamut. As you'll see when we get there, many people, when they eat from it and don't die, people say, well, what God meant, you will have mortality. And here's where I'm against people reading the text according to some kind of de'ah, some kind of preset idea. The text clearly says, at the moment, bayom, or on the day you eat from it, mot tamud. This is the Hebrew emphatic, you shall surely die, which of course does not happen. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Now we have the creation of the Isha coming up. Now here's something that I find comical, both profound and comical. So you might maybe I'm dreaming this up, but I think there's a bit of a joke here. Adonai Elohim, the same terms used with creating the human being are now with the animals. Adonai Elohim shapes from the earth all of the animals, the beasts of the field and the birds, and he brings them one by one to Adam. Here's I think the joke. Um, uh, um, Hold on a second. Oh, he brings them to El Hadam, lirot ma yikralo, to see what he's going to call them. So, you know, I think in a normal story of an omnipotent God, God would have already named the animals and God introduces them. Here's a crocodile, here's an elephant, here's a rhinoceros, here's a wolf. But he brings them and God's saying, I wonder what he's going to call these beings. So here we have Adam has the human has language, he has insight, and I can almost see the Adam rubbing his head and saying, "Well, what do I call this one?" Right now, of course, it's in some uh, original language of the human being, but the image is he already has language, he already has perception. God trots out each of the beings. And he says, "What are you going to call this one?" I mean, for me, this is so comic where he's like, "I'm running out of words," and God says, "Why elephant? I don't know. What do you? If you have a better name for it, I'm just going to call it an elephant." So anyway, I could do an extended and a little comedy skit on this. I will spare that of you. Um, then it says in verse 20, Vaikra Adam Shemot Lechol HaBehema. He gave each one of them their name. Vel Adam Lo Matza Ezer Kenegdo. But the human being did not find a Ezer Kenegdo. This is in verse 20. This is the introduction of the Isha. Now, what is Ezer Kenegdo? Ezer clearly has a sense of help. What does Keneged mean? Well, neged can mean across from. So neged einai, right in front of my eyes. So neged can mean opposite from, could mean oppositional, it could mean right in front. But one of the best translations I've read was a counterpart, a helping counterpart, which captures the Hebrew word ezer kenegdo rather perfectly. So a helping counterpart. Now, we don't know why the ezer kenegdo would help Adam until the next few verses. So he does not find a ezer kenegdo. Um, I'm sorry. The animals. I should go back. The animals are introduced with God saying, "Lo tov heyot hadam livado." Back in verse 18. I'm sorry. It is not good for the human being to be alone. Lo tov heyot hadam livado. Eselo ezer kenegdo. I will make him a helping counterpart. Tries out all the animals. A dog would have come close, but not close enough. So he tries out everything and he finally says, so we're going to have to try something new here. Of course, this is not journalism. It's not an account of how things happen. The author knows where the author is going to the creation of the woman. So God creates all the animals for Adam to find a helping counterpart. We don't know what the help is aside from the divine notices that the human being is livad. So the sense of loneliness. So here we have something called an etiological myth, the cause of things. And one of the situations of the human being is loneliness. And therefore, the idea of coupling up with another human being is understood to be that which addresses our inherent loneliness as human beings. Another way we're saying we need community. Minimally, the two people, but in some extended sense, that the loneliness is our condition, and communing with others addresses our condition, as we all find in each other helping counterparts. So God now wants to create the helping counterpart. And verse 21, Vayapel Adonai Elohim tardema al ha'adam vayishan. So the human being, lahapil means to throw upon. He throws upon the human being, tardema, a deep sleep. In modern Hebrew, lehiradem means to fall asleep. Radum means really deep asleep. And I can say, aiti radum legamre. I was completely dead asleep. Yashen is to sleep. Shena is sleep itself. Radum is a very kind of an intense, I think we call it deep or core sleep. Vayishan. Vayikach achat mitzalotav, and he took from one of his tzalotav, vayiskor basar takteha. So he took from his tzalotav. Now, a tzala means a rib, but a tzala can also mean a side. So, for example, when the building of the Mishkan, the tzala was a side of the Mishkan. Now, we don't know exactly what it means from context, though. It's a rib, and as in some kind of laboratory where they take DNA and they create a whole human being in the or being in the laboratory. It says God builds from the tzela, from the rib, another human being. So it says Vayiven Adonai Elohim et uh, uh, he builds the rib which he took from the Adam into a leisha. Now this woman, this word isha. I mentioned this in the Bible class. The word isha seems to be connected to the Hebrew word enosh. Enosh is another word you'll see means a human being. Ish is from the word enosh. It's a shortened form, very ancient, which means the words enosh and ish existed together. So if indeed enosh is the root of the word isha, and I think all scholars concur, the original form would have been insha. The Hebrew language does not like the word n at the end of a closing a syllable. So instead of inch, it would say ish. Instead of insha, it would say isha. Okay. So what we probably have here is a new form of an ancient Semitic word, enosh, which actually comes up. You will see. So he creates the isha. By the way, for those of you who know Hebrew grammar, you'll see a dagesh in the shin of isha, meaning there's a secret letter in there, probably the nun that fell away. So the dagesh in the shin tells us that there is a missing nun. Vayavi'eha el hadam, he brings the isha to the adam. Now here's something, again, this is the author reflecting on the human condition. So he says, Zot hapam etzem me atzamai. This, so you'll see the word zot repeated here. Zot, which means a recognition of that which stands outside of him. Zot. This is, this time, etzem me atzamai. Now, maze etzem. Etzem is a bone. So it's playing on the fact that in the image, the divine takes a rib bone, but etzem also means essence. So when we say, I say be'atzmi, by myself, what is Israeli Independence Day? Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. Okay? So what is the connection between atzmaut and etzem? Our essence is now free, right? Atzmaut means free, but it's connected to the Hebrew word for essence and bone. They're all from the same root. So when it says a bone from my bones, or essence from my essence, self from my self, and then it says flesh from my flesh. But this idea of etzem me atzamai, essence from my essence, is a fair reading of the text. And he says, lezot yikare isha ki me ish lukacha. It will be called an isha because from, or insha, because of from the ish, from the enosh, she was taken. Now another what's called etiological myth, which means the author is looking at how things are and wondering how they got this way. And what he's saying is we use the heterosexual male female. They used to be one, they were separated, so therefore they are attracted, as it were, to reunify the flesh. Now, so sometimes when I've studied this and people talk about different kinds of sexuality other than heterosexuality, I think the idea is exactly the same, meaning the erotic yearning of one human being for each other it implies a sense of being insufficient and being completed ideally by another human being. So eros is the same, I think, whether you're talking about heterosexuality, homosexuality, or any other sexuality. I think the inner sense that some of my essence is in this other human being. We belong together. Now, the Bible is clearly thinking of the act of sexual intercourse as it were the reuniting of the human being. So, from the biblical author's perspective, sexual intercourse is the reuniting of the human beings. It used to be one, but now are two. So it says, Al ken ya'azov ish et aviv imo. Therefore, an ish will leave his mother and father, vidavak beishto, and will cleave to his woman, uh, vehayu levasar echad, and they become again one flesh. So this is the authors reflecting on the idea of eros, the eros between human beings, and how there's an urge to reunite the divided human beings. And by the way, in all the weddings that I've done, as I interview the couple, there's a sense I have found my other. I have been completed by the other. The way that people just naturally talk without having read the Bible is the sense of being levad and then having been completed by another human being. Now we are moving toward the confrontation. It says, Vayihiyu shnehem arumim. Now we're in verse 25, 125. And the two of them were arumim ha'adam v'ishto velo yitboshashu. And the two of them were naked, the human being and his woman, velo yitboshashu, and they were not embarrassed or ashamed. So we're going to dilate for just a moment on this word arum. Now you'll see when we come to the snake, who's also called arum, it's a wonderful play on words of two different Hebrew roots that end up with a phonological similarity. So the Hebrew word erva, ayin resh he, or ayin resh vav, means genitalia. So that a son should not see the genitalia of the father, or a woman shall not show her genitalia to another man. So erva has a sense of discrete, private genitalia. So arum means that your genitalia are showing. So here we have the root ayin resh he or ayin resh vav. You see it many, many times in the Bible. The private parts that should stay private unless one is engaged in sexual intercourse with another person from a biblical perspective, with which one is permitted to have sexual intercourse. So erva in the Bible has a slight sense of impropriety. That it really should be kept private in the Bible, and sometimes we see this. Whenever I see people passionately kissing in public, I say, get a room. We all don't need to see this. It's something. It's a free country. People do what they want, but still, I think many of us have a sense of there are some things that actually should be private. Anyway, so what are they're doing? They're walking around in the garden with their private parts showing, and lo yitbashashu, they are not embarrassed because they have no self-consciousness. They don't have consciousness that something should be hidden, which again is a deep, constant part of biblical sexuality. All right. Okay, I want to go a few more minutes just to introduce the Gan Eden story and see if there are any questions. Now, so here's the setup. The Garden of Confrontation, Genesis chapter 3. Now we're going to slow way down. Vehanachash haya arum mikol chayat hasadeh asher asa Adonai Elohim. The Nachash was arum, sounds like naked, but that's not the root, from all the other animals of the field which Adonai Elohim had made. So the Nachash was made by the divine with the nature of the Nachash. And in context, Adam saw the nature of the Nachash and gave the Nachash that name. So what does Nachash mean? Well, it means snake or serpent. But if you look further in the Bible, Nachash is always connected with magic, um, some the or a diviner of secrets, the kinds of things that in Deuteronomy are proscribed. Now, in modern Hebrew, lenachesh means to guess or speculate, but in the biblical context, it was a person who had gained illicit knowledge. A person who gained illicit knowledge. It both meant snake and a diviner and astrologer, someone who engaged in any kind of divination. So in the Hebrew mind, try to imagine reading it. It says a fortune teller, a diviner, um, someone who read tea leaves, a tarot card player. So Nachash comes with an entire baggage of a being that has access to knowledge that the rest of us don't have, and a sense that it is illicit knowledge. Now, in context, by the way, I should just expand. A few years ago, I did a long Dvar Torah on the snake in ancient literature. The snake in ancient literature was an interesting being because it was understood to be also a metaphor for eternal life, since the snake shed its skin and became new again. So the Nachash is both a one that has profound illicit knowledge and is promised eternal life in its ability to shed its skin. So there's a wealth of ancient mythology on the snake. The biblical author knows this mythology, but has compressed it into putting the Nachash, the fortune teller, the magician, in the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which might be the same as the tree of life. Again, we're not sure. So when we have this image, all of a sudden, all the setup that I've been talking about comes down to this moment. Again, if this were a director, this would be the moment when you say, oh no, something really, really bad is going to happen. So I'll just do the section. I'll stop for today, take questions, and make a few comments on other things, and we'll continue next week. So what does the fortune teller, tea leaves reader, magician say? He starts out by saying, verse oh, so he by the way, in verse 1, it focuses which Adonai Elohim had made. So he's a creation of the divine. Vayomer Elhan Vatomer, hold on a second, let me get my reading back. Vayomer El Haisha, and he says to the woman, Av ki amar Elohim lo tuchlu mikol eitz hagam. Didn't God say that you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? It's a setup. He's looking for her to say, no, that's wrong. We can eat from anything. So he says in at the verse, Af ki amar Elohim lo tochlu mikol eitz hagam. Did God say you can't eat from the trees? Vatomer Aisha el nachash. The woman says to the magician, Mi pri eitz hagan nochel. We can eat from the tree of the garden. Umipri eitz asher betoch hagan, but from the tree in the midst of the garden, Amar Elohim, God said, Lo tochlu mimenu, velo tig'u bo, pen tamutum. Now, Eve has Chava, the woman, has added information that distorts what the divine had said to Adam, and I think highly intentionally. Is not a midrashic jump to assume that the woman was not there when God commanded Adam. Therefore, what we're hearing here is what Adam added when he told the woman. So let's look carefully at what the woman understands. She says, "Lo tochlu mimenu, don't eat from it. Velo tig uvo, and don't even touch it," which is, of course, not what God said. Now, again, I think there's a little bit of a joke embedded here. That when somebody is told, don't eat of that, the parent will say to the child, you know what? Don't even touch it. Don't even go near there. There's a running joke in my family when Mirav will be preparing something on the stove. She says, "Okay, uh, don't touch this, okay?" Because I tend to touch everything. And I said, "I won't even look at it hard. I promise." And I walk around and avert my eyes. She says, "Okay, knock it off." Okay, so don't eat it, don't touch it, don't even look at it hard. Okay, so Adam is saying this to her, and she says, "Okay, I won't touch it. I won't look at it hard. I'll walk by it. I won't go near it." And which is obscuring the commandment, don't eat it, lest you die. Pen tumutum. Vayomer hanachash el ha'isha. And the magician says to the woman, you're not going to die. Lo tumutum. Lo tumutum. All right. I just want to add a few comments and stop here. So what's happening here? How does the snake know what happened in that conversation with Adam? Okay? And how does the snake know that when they eat from the tree, they won't die? So this is a very interesting question, which I think the author wants us to have. Where was the snake, the Nachash, the magician, when Elohim, when God and the Adam had this conversation? Well, he's right nearby. He's listening in. So try to imagine this: the enticer is listening. He says, "Okay, I found my way in. I found my way in." God says, "You'll die." Now, here's my little midrashic side conversation. The snake says, they're not going to die. God says, I know they're not going to die, but I got to scare them. Right? The snake goes, okay, I can use that. So in the background, of course, God and the snake know the human beings won't die if they eat from the fruit. This God and the snake know it. So therefore, why would God say you're going to die? Clearly, as when Adam said, don't touch it, lest you die, God is saying, don't eat it, lest you die, because God wants to scare them. You'll see this in a bit. So the snake actually reveals the truth. Okay? And the truth, of course, is when you eat it, your eyes are going to open. All right, so I'm going to develop this next time. But the context of Gan Eden, the garden of confrontation and deceit and misdirection, is up until this point, the only one telling the truth is the snake. God is not telling the truth. The human beings disobey. And we have this, as it were, overthrowing of our normal sensibilities, where the only one we can rely on here is the magician, necromancer, fortune teller, who has access to illicit knowledge. Now, as the story goes on, as you'll see next week, it actually turns into kind of a horror story, because the Adam and the woman were put somewhere that they had no idea how to manage, because of these beings, the divine and the snake, so much more powerful. It's as if they were ambush. So I'll share this next time. Sometimes I call this the garden of the ambush, the garden of deceit, mischief, ambush, because it is not, as it were, the garden of delight. Very little of delight seems to happen in this garden. All right, so I hope you've enjoyed this word by word close reading of a text that we all know most people misinterpret. It's not adult education. It's not the moral of the story. It's a very, very troubling story of things that are very hard to define. I'll work at that at the end of our next session of what does all this mean? Again, stories don't come with an available meaning. Literature depends on us to create meaning out of the text. And I want to share with you the meaning that I have created of this text, because I think this text sets up much of what happens later on in the Bible, which is like the first poem. What we have are two overtures of what happens in the Bible. And of course, what happens in the Bible is the constant playing out both of the human tragedy, the tragedy of the human condition, and moments of great light and hope and transformation, all embedded in these first few chapters.